wired differently. And no, I'm not talking about some sci-fi movie situation, although Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, kind of makes it feel that way sometimes.
Yeah, it's true. He presents a really compelling case for how technology, specifically the timing of its arrival, has fundamentally changed the experience of childhood.
Right. Like, I grew up with the internet, but this whole great rewiring thing he talks about, that's next level.
Okay.
So what exactly does he mean by that? Are we saying smartphones are turning kids into, like, different people?
Well, he uses this fascinating analogy. Imagine raising kids on Mars. They'd adapt to the lower gravity, right? But those physical changes would make it near impossible to return to Earth.
Okay, hold up. You're saying growing up with high-speed internet, smartphones, and the whole social media circus is like adapting to a different planet. Tell me more.
Think about it. The oldest Gen Zers, they hit puberty around 2009. High-speed internet was becoming the norm, the iPhone was exploding, and social media, especially with the introduction of the like button, became, well, all-consuming.
And then?
And then, in 2010, the iPhone 4 dropped with that front-facing camera, selfies, self-presentation. It all became a core part of online life, right at the exact moment when adolescents are already grappling with identity anxieties, figuring out where they fit in.
Wow. That's a lot to process. It's like they're trying to build a house in the middle of an earthquake. And this constant online world becomes their new normal, not just some extra thing they do.
Exactly. And it's drastically different from previous generations. Before 2009, social media was mostly about keeping up with friends, not this constant cycle of posting, comparing, and seeking validation. Now it's this hypervisual, self-focused environment where everything feels like a performance.
And we're surprised they're anxious. It's like we've handed them this incredibly powerful, addictive tool right when their brains are most vulnerable. But he doesn't stop at tech, right? He also dives into overprotection and the decline of free play, which feels almost ironic given how much scarier the world seems NOW.
It is a strange paradox, isn't it? We're more fearful for our children's safety, but we're less likely to let them experience the kind of unsupervised, unstructured play that builds resilience and independence.
You know, I remember roaming my neighborhood with friends until the streetlights came on. No cell phones, just pure freedom. Are you saying kids today are missing out on that?
Sadly, it's becoming less and less common. And it's not just nostalgia. Decades of research shows free play is crucial for development. It's how kids learn to navigate risks, problem solve, cooperate, develop self-reliance.
So by trying to shield kids from every little thing, we're actually making them more vulnerable in the long run. That's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of parents.
It is. And Haidt argues this is a form of well-intentioned harm. He uses the example of trees needing wind to grow strong. The wind's resistance is what helps them develop those deep roots and sturdy trunks. Shield a tree, and it'll be more likely to topple in a storm.
So we're basically raising our kids in these metaphorical greenhouses and then wondering why they wilt at the first sign of a challenge. But what's actually happening inside those developing brains when they're glued to their phones? Haidt talks about discover mode and defend mode, right?
Yes. Imagine your brain is constantly scanning for opportunities and threats. Discover mode is that open, curious, and playful state. It's where learning, creativity, and connection flourish. Then there's defend mode, which kicks in when we sense danger. Our focus narrows, stress hormones surge, and we're on high alert.
And you're saying all the social comparison fear of missing out and potential for drama online can trap young minds in this defend mode.
Precisely. Imagine it. Constant virtual stressors, notifications, buzzing the pressure to present this perfect image. It all triggers that fight or flight response. And when this becomes their default, it impacts their ability to engage in real-world experiences that require vulnerability and openness.
It's like they're stuck in a perpetual state of fight or flight, even when there's no real danger. No wonder they're exhausted. But it's not just about being in defend mode, right? There's also this whole dopamine dilemma you mentioned earlier. Now that's got to be good for a cliffhanger.
Right. You know how our brains get that hit of dopamine when we experience something pleasurable? This is like a reward system, right? Encouraging us to repeat those behaviors.
Totally. Like that feeling after a great meal or finally finishing a project. Good feelings reinforce those actions.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Social media has figured out how to hijack that system. Those platforms are designed to trigger dopamine in rapid-fire succession. Every notification, like, and comment becomes this little hit like a digital slot machine keeping you hooked.
No wonder it's so hard to put the phone down. You're constantly chasing that next hit, even if it doesn't bring any real satisfaction.
And that's the dopamine dilemma.
Yeah.
It's not about lasting fulfillment. It's about craving. So the more we chase, the more we need, leading to addiction and a whole host of other problems.
Which brings us to another point Haidt makes. It's not just our social lives being affected, right? He talks about sleep attention span, even our sense of purpose taking a hit. It's like our phones are these little black holes sucking the life out of everything.
He calls them the 4 foundational harms of a phone-based childhood: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. And let's be honest, it's not just Gen Z struggling with this. We're all susceptible to that addictive pull.
True that. But I keep thinking about how girls seem to be hit particularly hard, especially when it comes to mental health. What's going on there?
Well, several factors are at play. First, girls tend to spend more time on those visual-heavy platforms like Instagram and TikTok.
Which translates to more opportunities for social comparison, right? It's like taking those teenage insecurities we all had and amplifying them 1,000 times over.
Exactly. Seeing those curated, filtered images of perfection can fuel body image issues, disordered eating, and a constant feeling of not being good enough.
It's social comparison on steroids. No wonder anxiety and depression rates are soaring among young women.
And then there's the issue of relational aggression, which girls are more likely to experience. Cyberbullying is insidious because it often flies under the radar of adults and it follows them everywhere online.
So we've got girls facing this triple threat: social comparison, cyberbullying, and the addictive nature of these platforms. It's like a recipe for disaster. But what about boys? Are they immune to all of this?
Not at all. While boys might not be experiencing that same sharp spike in anxiety and depression as girls, their mental health has been declining for decades, and the Great Rewiring is accelerating that trend.
So it's more of a slow burn for boys?
In a way, yes. And it manifests differently. Boys are more likely to retreat into the virtual world, spending hours gaming or consuming endless content. They're disengaging from schoolwork, even real-life relationships. It's like they're checking out of reality altogether.
I see this with my nephew. It's like prying him away from his video games is a Herculean effort. But you mentioned something earlier about boys facing societal shifts too. What do you mean by that?
Right. So Haidt points out that those traditional pathways to manhood, like physical labor or skilled trades, are becoming less common. At the same time, there's increasing pressure for academic achievement.
So they're stuck in this limbo, unsure of how to navigate this new landscape of masculinity.
Exactly. And then you add in the readily available access to pornography, which can warp their understanding of relationships and intimacy, making healthy connections even more challenging.
It paints a pretty bleak picture for both boys and girls. But beyond the psychological effects, Haidt also talks about a spiritual cost to this constant connectedness. Now that's intriguing. What does he mean by that?
It's fascinating. He draws on the work of sociologist Emil Durkheim, who argued that human societies need both the sacred and the profane. The sacred refers to things we hold in reverence, experiences that connect us to something larger than ourselves. The profane is the everyday, the mundane, the self-focused.
Okay, so how does tech fit into all of this? Is he saying our phones are profane?
Not necessarily the phones themselves, but Haidt argues that our constant connection to the digital world keeps us trapped in the profane. It's this never-ending stream of information, distractions, self-promotion. We're always on, checking, comparing, seeking that next dopamine hit. It's a recipe for spiritual depletion.
So we're losing that sense of awe, that connection to something bigger that helps us find meaning and purpose.
Exactly. And Haidt points to nature as a powerful antidote to this spiritual malaise. He talks about the importance of all walks, intentionally going out into nature, leaving your phone behind, and simply allowing yourself to be present to the beauty and grandeur of the natural world.
That resonates with me, just stepping away from the digital noise and feeling humbled by the vastness of it all. It's a powerful reminder that there's more to life than our own little worries and anxieties.
It's a way to reclaim that sense of the sacred, to connect to something that transcends our ego and limited perspective.
This is heavy stuff, but it's not just doom and gloom, right? Haidt offers solutions, ways to push back against this great rewiring and reclaim a healthier childhood for Gen Z. What are some of those concrete steps we can take?
Okay, so after that deep dive into the problems, what can we actually do about all of this? It feels pretty massive, like we're going up against these tech giants and like deeply ingrained societal trends.
It's true. It's definitely complex. But Haidt is actually quite optimistic about our ability to make a change. He lays out some really practical steps we can take, starting with governments.
Okay, so governments first. What can they do? Should we be sending like strongly worded emails? Well, it starts with recognizing social media companies for what they are. They're incredibly powerful entities, not just these neutral platforms for connection. You know, we've had regulations on things like food safety, product safety, even what's shown on children's television for decades.
That's true. We don't just let companies sell anything to kids, especially if it's potentially harmful.
Right. So why are social media companies any different? Hate argues we need to establish a duty of care for them, especially when it comes to young users.
So holding them accountable for the effects their platforms can have on kids, how do we even begin to do that?
Well, one way is through age verification. The UK has already implemented an age-appropriate design code requiring companies to consider the best interests of children when designing online services. And we're seeing similar efforts in the US with states like California passing their own laws.
So no more 10-year-olds pretending to be 13 to open Instagram accounts. I can already hear the collective groan from preteens everywhere.
Ideally, yes. Of course, age verification has its challenges, but it's about making it tougher for companies to target those young users who aren't developmentally ready for those platforms.
It's about putting some safeguards in place. Another thing Hate talks about is phone-free schools. Did that stand out to you?
Absolutely. It's about creating that learning environment where kids can focus, connect with each other offline, and reclaim those hours they're currently losing to scrolling through their phones.
I can imagine some parents might be hesitant about that, wanting to be able to reach their kids at all times.
Sure, I get that. But the research is clear. Phones in schools are a major distraction. They contribute to social comparison and anxiety, and they even negatively impact grades. It's hard enough for adults to resist checking their phones. Imagine trying to focus on algebra with TikTok notifications buzzing in your pocket.
You're preaching to the choir. Okay, so no phones at school makes sense. And then there's this whole overprotection thing, which Hate says is actually a form of neglect. That seems kind of counterintuitive. How can being overprotective be neglectful?
Because it deprives children of the experiences they need to develop independence, resilience, a sense of agency. It's like we're constantly telling them they're not capable of handling things on their own.
So how do we reverse that trend?
Hate suggests something called reasonable childhood independence laws. These would clarify that it's not neglect to let kids do age-appropriate things unsupervised. Think letting your 10-year-old walk to the park with a friend or stay home alone for a bit. These laws would protect parents who are trying to raise self-reliant kids from being unfairly scrutinized.
That's huge. I know so many parents who are afraid to give their kids any freedom because of that fear.
It's a valid concern, and it's preventing kids from experiencing a true childhood. Okay, so we've got government setting boundaries, encouraging phone-free schools, and rethinking overprotection.
Yeah.
But what about the tech companies themselves? Can we really expect them to change?
Right. It feels like we're asking them to go against their own interests.
It's a challenge for sure. Their current model relies on maximizing user engagement, which often means exploiting our vulnerabilities and addictive tendencies. But Hate believes that creating a more ethical tech ecosystem as possible.
What would that even look like? Are we talking about some tech utopia?
Maybe not utopia, but we can push for change. For starters, they could design platforms with well-being in mind, not just engagement. Think limiting notifications, offering tools to manage screen time, even nudging users towards more mindful habits, like those pop-up reminders that tell you how much time you've spent on an app. Those can be eye-opening.
They can be terrifying, too.
True, but it's about creating friction, making it just a little bit harder to get sucked in. It's not about abandoning technology altogether,
Right.
but about using it in a way that supports our well-being.
So much of this comes down to awareness and making conscious choices, which brings us to the role of schools. Can they be agents of change in all of this?
Absolutely. Beyond going phone-free, they can incorporate more play into the school day, encourage outdoor learning, and even give assignments that require kids to do things independently, like the Let Grow project that Hate mentions.
I love that. It's like homework for real life skills.
Exactly. It helps kids and their parents realize they're more capable than they think.
So we've got governments, tech companies, and schools all playing a role. But what about us? What about us as parents? Where do we fit in?
We're the front line, right? We decide when our kids get a phone, how much screen time they have, what activities they engage in. It can feel overwhelming, especially with the pressure of all the other kids who are already plugged in.
It's true. It's like this unspoken competition. Oh, your kid has a smartphone. Well, mine just learned to code in their sleep.
It's a real dilemma. But even with those pressures, Hate emphasizes that parents have more power than they realize. We can set limits, model healthy habits, and prioritize those real-world experiences.
So family dinners without phones, device-free time in nature, encouraging hobbies that get them off screens, interacting with the world, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And we can be mindful of our own tech use, too. Our kids are watching us and learning from our habits.
Yeah.
We can't expect them to have a healthy relationship with technology if we're constantly glued to our own devices.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Right.
lead by example.
Exactly. It's about creating a family culture that values connection, play, and real-life experiences, those things that help kids thrive. It's not easy, but it's definitely worth striving for.
You covered a lot of ground today. It's a lot to process. What's your biggest takeaway from all of this?
For me, it's that sense of hope. Hate doesn't just leave us with a problem. He offers some concrete solutions. It's not about demonizing technology, but about being mindful of its impact and finding ways to reclaim what makes childhood so special.
Totally. It's about empowering ourselves as parents, educators, policymakers to make choices that support the well-being of this generation. This deep dive was really just the beginning. So what will you do with this information? Maybe it's time to rethink those screen time rules, schedule some device-free family time, or even just take a walk in nature and soak up some awe. Until next time.